Recently, I had the honor of listening to Vietnam veteran Dave Hill tell his story of what happened the night Medal of Honor recipient Larry Taylor rescued Hill and 3 others during the war in Vietnam. Mr. Hill also told the story of the work he did along with several others to help get Taylor the Medal of Honor. Today on the show, Dave Hill tells his story in his own words. My name is Josh Rowe, and this is Tomorrowtown, Tennessee.
June 18th, started out for our team. We were a 4-man long-range patrol team, Rangers. We operated independently. The firepower we have is just what we carried on our back, the ammunition, the grenades, what we could pack. And we could pack a lot of it, and fortunately that night we were. But we were very dependent on our air support. Mission started fairly typically. We were given a what we call a recon zone, and it's a grid, and that particular recon zone was about 4 kilometers by 4 kilometers. We worked within there. Friendly aircraft knew we were there, so we didn't get shot by our own folks, because we certainly didn't look like American infantrymen. You'll see later on in the exhibit exactly how we dressed: tiger camouflage, no hats, headbands, foreign weapons in many cases. So we took off, and our thrust of what we call a zone recon mission. We're to go out and see what was out there. We packed up. Each rifleman was carrying about 640 rounds of ammunition, which is about double the standard load for an American infantryman. But it was to be a short patrol, just 2 days, 2 nights. So we went to light on everything except water and ammunition and grenades and our trusty Claymore anti-personnel mines. So then we went, as we started out usually, looking for trouble. And we found it. At any rate, we moved overland. Normally we'd be deposited out in the middle of the jungle out of a Huey helicopter. Usually 2 ships. We'd be in one ship. We'd have a chase ship just in case that got shot down. They had to recover us and the crew. And we'd go out usually, and we'd dip 3 different times, just like looking for that pea under the walnut shell game. Which landing zone did we get off that helicopter of? And then they continue on down, and we do our mission. This was all flat rice paddy area, so we proceeded on foot, and what we call a walkout mission. Our mission launch site was a South Vietnamese compound. We left, moved into a wood line south of where we were going to spend the night, what we called our ambush oversight position. And our primary game plan, if we spot somebody at a distance, we would take them under our artillery or air assault. If they were close enough and they were a small group like us, then we would bushwhack them ourselves. That was our job. And if we had the advantage, if we didn't have the advantage, we'd leave it well enough alone. We were not shy about avoiding contacts that were not totally as much as possible in our favor. Well, that night, we had with us what was then almost a secret weapon. It was brand new. It had only been out in the inventory for less than a year. It was what's called a starlight scope. It's an early night vision scope. It was a half moonlit night, so we could see pretty good, we thought. I was rear security and assistant team leader, so my teammates preceded me. Our team leader walked his own point, had the starlight scope. He got about 200 meters out of the wood line. We waited there till full dark. We didn't want to be seen, obviously, moving into our final overwatch. We walked in kind of an open side of a horseshoe, size of about a paddy area. They were on rice paddy dikes, about a football-sized field. So he said, "You take point." He turned me back around. I proceeded about a dozen paces, and I got a tap on the shoulder from our grenadier, Billy Kahn. He said, "Stop." They just moved a couple of squads of enemy between us and the wood line. So now what had been a semi-enclosure, we were fully enclosed. Fortunately, we were right at the junction of a couple of ox cart paths, the water buffaloes they use for tending the fields there in the rice paddies. They were 5 feet thick at the top, probably 7 or 8 at the bottom, and they were sun-hardened laterite clay, and it was like concrete. And as we later found out, it was strong enough to stop rocket-propelled grenade hitting into it. It's almost like a battleship. So at this point, they still don't know we're there. And Elser, our team leader, Bob Elser. Bob is from Manhattan, New York. Gerald Patty is radio man, was just north of here, Maryville, Tennessee. Billy Combs from Old Mystic, Connecticut. And at that point, I was from a small farming town in California called Visalia, down in Tulare County. So a mixed group, but we a lot of confidence in each other, didn't always have to say much, and we seldom ever said anything we could, used sign most of the time, because we couldn't make any noise. Stealth was our big weapon. So that night we were sneaky enough to get into the situation, but we weren't going to be sneaky enough to get out of it, not by ourselves. So we hunkered there, and Elsner said, here's where we make our stand. Then he got on the horn, the radio, called for help. Our forward air, operating base, which is our radio relay, because our Prick 25 radios were fairly older technology, didn't have a long range. They got a team of what they call a light fire team. And in this case, it was 2 latest in the inventory AH-1G Cobra attack helicopters. Captain Larry Taylor, at the time was a lieutenant, but still he was the flight leader. He was scrambled. They got less than 5 minutes to get that bird up in the air and get on the way to help Americans out. That was his primary job, is protecting American infantrymen like ourselves. So Larry proceeded to our direction. He had a grid on the map, but it was pitch black, so that map was not real useful. It was long before GPS, but he had a compass azimuth and an approximate distance. He used his radio direction finder on his aircraft. He flew right over top of us, and then he proceeded to support us. Once we marked our position clearly, they started their gun runs. Each ship was carrying 76 air-to-ground rockets, 8,000 machine gun ammunition. They say we were heavily armed, they were heavily armed. They proceeded to put a wall of steel around us. They were flying low level because normally they would start an attack run to 1,500 feet and break out of it at 1,000 feet. Taylor was running his at 15 to 20 feet above the ground because there's a couple of fires in the village to the west of us had been started. We'd taken fire out of there, and some tracers had set those hooches on fire. So he was sweeping along the ground. He had his targets backlit. It worked good until he started to run out of fuel. He started to run out of ammunition, and then pretty quick, he was out of rockets, had about 15, had about maybe 150 rounds of his machine gun ammunition. The wingman was in the same situation, and we were down to our last magazine. So we'd been shooting everything we had. And the best way I described it talking to Brad is like a game of whack-a-mole. As long as we stayed in defilade, which meant we couldn't be hit by direct fire, then we could get up, pop up, shoot, see that down, and they're doing the same thing out there. The situation for them, though, was so different. They couldn't hide from Larry Taylor because he was coming in over top of them. So at that point, Larry had been expecting a relieving group of 2 gunships come relieve him so he and his wingman could go get rearmed, refueled, and come back to the fight. It was about a half hour into the battle. He got word that those ships were not on their way. Also supposed to be an extraction ship, what we call a Huey Slick. It's a transport helicopter. And that could not get to the battle in time because they had comms problem. They had to return to base. So Larry Taylor started analyzing what he had in his hand. He said, well, I'm not out of choices, but I don't have very many good ones left. He said, hatched a plan. And he called in his commander. He says, I'm going to go down and get those folks. He said, no, they've been trained to escape and evade. And he said, you don't understand. There's no place to escape and evade to, or they'd have done it. And he said, I'm going to proceed to do that. And I'm the on-scene senior commander. It's my prerogative. And they said, no, it's not. We outrank you. You return to base. He told my team leader, Bob Elsner, he said, come up on push 2. That means come up on our alternate frequency. He knew it, our team leader knew it, nobody in the rear knew it. So he said, those guys, you're out of the fight because you're not useful to me or that team on the ground. He said, I know there's some kind of misunderstanding because no Army commander would ever say, don't help people out that you think you can. So now he's got a utility helicopter instead of a gunship. And he says, I'm going to go in. He talks to our team leader and said, you guys got any Claymore mines left? And we said, yep, we got 4. We'd already blown off 4 previous in the fight and some close-in targets. He said, I want you to shoot 2 of them to the northeast and 2 of them to the southeast. Claymore directional mine is a 1.5 pound of C4 explosives, 750 steel ball bearings laid on top of it, kind of a convex shape, and it moves out about 4,000 feet per second. So 4 of those mines, you got 3,000 rounds moving at about 4,000 feet per second. We didn't need to get broken out of there for long, but we had to be through the encirclement, and that would get the opening that we needed. He said, when I make my last gun run to the west, I want you guys to blow your mines, head out into the rice paddies, and on the azimuth, specific azimuth of 135 degrees, which is southeast. The river was straight east of us. That would be the most obvious point of or direction of egress for our team. And the enemy's not stupid, and they get a vote. They knew what they thought we were going to try to do. Blew the mines. At that point, didn't know what Larry was going to do because, for those of you not aware of it, the AH-1G Cobra is a 2-man helicopter. It's not a transport helicopter. There's no cabin. You got a pilot, co-pilot, seated tandem in an aircraft that's got a cross-section of 36 inches. They could barely fit in there. So nobody thought he could do it. It'd never been done before. But he said, I'm going to make this a transport helicopter. So he said, you guys go ahead and blow that, I'll meet you in the same hole in the mud out in that rice paddy. And sure enough, we got out there. I was the only one who had anything left at all. I had a half dozen grenades, about half of what I started the night with. I was rear security, so my job is to slow down the enemy any way we could. Out of ammunition, I let the team get out in front enough so they wouldn't be caught in any friendly blast, and started throwing the last of my grenades that I caught up to them. I got up there, and our team leader, Elser, said, jump on. I said, what do you mean jump on? Jump on where? We'd never seen a Cobra gunship. So it was barren as far as we could tell. My teammate Billy Kahn and I looked at the rocket pods, which stuck out about that far of a little weapon sponson from which they descended. We said, let's jump on them like a horse. So we jumped on them backwards, our hands draped over that little wing, and that's our position. We could only grip with our right leg because the distance between the rocket pod was too tight for that other leg to drop down. But we gripped mighty, mighty tight, tighter than any bronc buster you can imagine to do that. Our other guys went on the other side on the skids. We wrapped on the side of the fuselage, and Larry knew we were on. He took us straight up 1,500 feet and to get us out of small arms range, and got down a little lower so we didn't die of hypothermia because we were soaking wet. We were covered with mud. It was the start of the rainy season. There was an armor unit, actually his sister ground armor unit of 1st Squadron, 4th Cavalry, and he dropped us off right in the middle of that. We had no other way of talking to him. Our radio by then had broken antenna. We couldn't talk, so we just ran around the front of the helicopter and we just salute, thumbs up. That means thank you, good job. And he got up and took off. Well, that happened night of 18th June 1968. I didn't see Larry Taylor again till 30 years later, a little more than that. In 1999, he came to our first reunion. And we had assumed, and we're tremendously well-read, probably generally in matters of the world, that he had gotten the Medal of Honor, because he certainly was worthy of getting that medal. We found, no, he'd been upgraded from a Distinguished Flying Cross to a Silver Star. Well, 5 of us received a Silver Star for that action. And there's something wrong here, because I know what we did. I'm proud of what we did, but what we did is here, and what Captain Taylor did is up here. It's got to be recognized as such. But, we weren't attorneys. We weren't familiar with that type of regulation. So we got to do something eventually. And so finally, I sent a letter to then Senator Bob Corker, Tennessee's United States Senator. I said, you have a native son there in Chattanooga, Tennessee, very deserving of much more recognition by our military, by our people, than he's received to date. You'll never hear it from him. He'll never bring it up. He didn't seek any glory, and certainly there's really nothing glorious about war at best. But I had figured at that point, since my job, I worked with a lot of regulations, government regulations. I said, there's got to be a process. I may not like that process. It's probably filled with paperwork, red tape, as Brad said, but we have to figure this out. So he assigned a lady, Stacy, became Stacy Oliver. She's married since then. She was his military aide, same job that Jules Dew has for Representative Fleischman. So she shot me a copy of the regulations. She started looking at them herself. We compared notes and said, this is what we need to do. This is what the regulations require. Witness letters, a section called justification, another section called narrative, pictures, maps of the area. Fortunately, I had some maps still of the battle area. Witness letters. Yeah, and if you don't have witnesses, you got to account for everybody that was in the battle. So I literally went through everything, all from the generals on down, through the squadron, through the D Troop, which was Larry's immediate unit, and accounted for all of them, dead or alive. If they're alive, I got letters from them. But we needed 2 letters. I could supply one as being an eyewitness, and certainly from the ground perspective. Larry's co-pilot, a gentleman named Chief Warrant Officer J.O. Ratliff, was the other witness. Well, J.O. Ratliff, we first didn't know where to get a hold of him. I got some help from a gentleman here in Chattanooga to some reports that would pin down at least where his stateside home was. And so this is getting bigger and bigger, trying to find people to write letters, get the facts, get all the data. And I told Stacy, I said, we need some help. Well, I started talking and met a gentleman named Carl Poston. And Carl, I said, well, let me talk to General Raines and send him the information. Well, I sent the letter to General Raines, and he looked at it and said, yep, I believe this fella here should have something higher than a Silver Star. Carl called me up and said, well, General Raines says we can use his office. And we formed a task force. A gentleman from Southern California, a ranger buddy of mine, Ronnie Eimel. We would fly out to Chattanooga. We'd meet in General Raines' office. He gave us the use of his fax machine, his copiers, his telephone, his conference rooms, secretarial support, whatever we needed. And we proceeded to put the packet together. We ended up with a packet probably about half that size there. But, it was only 6 years into doing, took a little less paper. So at any rate, we worked on it. And it was frustrating, just as these 2 gentlemen have said. We would send in, we would get a question back from the Department of the Army, their Awards Decoration Branch and their Human Resource Command at Fort Knox, Kentucky. We send a response to their request. We wait 6 months to get a response back to that. And then they would give us another question that had to be answered. Another 6 months later, they would come back and tell us up or down, did it work or we need something else. So it's back and forth. Not surprising, it's a Medal of Honor. It's the highest valor award our nation gives, so it should be a very rough road to hoe. And boy, they sure made it that way. I mean, I thought knowing export and import regulations was tough. The Army is a totally different set of regulations. But we learned them. We had to. You had to adapt just like you do as a soldier. We had a new battlefield, and nobody's going to die if we fail. but certainly a great injustice was not going to be rectified, and that's getting Captain Taylor that medal. So finally, we'd exhausted our avenues. The Awards and Decoration Branch told us not going to work. And by that time, General Bell had joined our team. He talked directly with the commander of the Human Resource Command, and he said, look, they're right, you're a dead end here with awards and decorations. However, they recommended that we go to what's called the Army Board for the Correction of Military Records, ABCMR, which is located near the Pentagon back in Arlington, Virginia. So we filed another form. There's always a form in the U.S. government, the VB 149, and that's we're appealing the decision of the Human Resource Command. Well, it still had some of the same stumbling blocks. We proceeded. 5 months later, we got a letter back saying, you lose again. Well, at that point, you've only got one shot left. You can ask for a request for reconsideration. So our task force sat down again. General Bell and I sat in this very room, right over there in that room, right where those folks are there, and went through the documents and the questions and the stumbling points word by word by word, literally, with a ruler down and looking, talking. Is that right? General Bell said, you do that? You got that document? Yep. How about this one? Yep. How about this section here? Can you do any more? No, that seems to fulfill the thing. If you know General Bell, there's a reason he's a General Bell. Very analytical, very smart, no nonsense. If he thought we were up the wrong tree, he would tell us. And if he thought the cause in the first place was not just, he would have had no part in it, nor would Admiral Long, nor General Raines. So we had the full flag support of Chattanooga, and there's some very heavy duty support. Well, we got to a point where General Bell, there was one final stumbling point, which we are having a hard time overcoming. They wanted to know, do you have evidence of new and substantive information not known at the time of the award decision was made? So they want us to be able to say, good substantive information that was not available in 1968 when Larry's commander made a decision that he would be getting a Silver Star. General Bell said, well, this section here, narrative, where did all that information come from? I said, well, it came from us, and it came from a book written in 1999 called Phantom Warriors, written by a ranger in the 101st Airborne Division. He said, 99. 30 years after these guys made a decision on Larry's award. Did they know this information? I said, no, they knew nothing about what occurred on the ground because nobody ever interviewed us during the time they made a decision. You got to understand, in 1968 was the bloodiest year of the war. We were in a period after Tet, but after Tet, they had mini Tet, and we were just after the start of that. 16,000 men were killed in action in 68. We were very small cogs in a very small part of it, a small wheel. The war went on, and it needs to be, the war like Medal of Honor needs to be pushed from the very bottom to the very top of the chain of command. Well, Larry's chain of command was wiped out essentially. His true commander was killed in air-to-air just 2 weeks after the incident. General Keith Ware, who himself had been a Medal of Honor winner, recipient in World War II, was commanding the division. He was shot down, and he was killed, his sergeant major, his whole air crew, about 4 months later. So you got your legs cut underneath for anybody that would have pushed his award. So he said, but General Bell got back to the point and said, my point is, nobody's heard your side of the story. Nobody really knew what was going on the ground and how dire your circumstance was. And they never did find out. And those guys are long gone, long dead. So that's new and substantive. I think that'll work. And he said, let's sit down and rewrite this thing and resubmit. About 5 months later, we got a letter back from the board, Army Board for Correction of Military Records, said, you have prevailed. You've made your point. We're sending it back. for approval and going up through the chain of command. The Army G1, eventually the Army Chief, and then the Chief of Staff. Eventually the President is the one and only and final authority. It's his discretion whether to award the Medal of Honor. Well, finally, after all that frustration, I think it was July, Larry, as a lot of you know, was terminally ill by that time, very weak, sleeping whenever he could, having trouble even doing that. Tony, his wife, went in to wake him up, and he sat up in bed and said, What'd you wake me up for? He said, well, the President's calling. And he said, the President of what? So he got on, had a nice conversation, and President Biden said, "You'll be awarded. My staff will be back to you within a few days, and set up all the steps that need to be accomplished to get you that medal." So we proceeded to work. Normally, a Medal of Honor process is about Paula Smith, which Brad mentioned. They usually have 60 days to do a Medal of Honor to get set for the ceremony. All the documentation, all the graphics, anything related to it. It's a very big event. It certainly makes a popular man of a president when he's able to hand this out. Not done lightly, but it's a very big deal. It's a big deal in Washington. Well, they had a truncated time. They only had 28 days to do it. So Paula Smith essentially drafted myself and a gentleman who unfortunately passed not long after the Washington ceremony, Mike Holden. Mike and Larry and I had all served in the Big Red 1, 1st Infantry Division. Gotten to know Mike real well. Great guy. And he knew military history, so did I, and we could write. So Paula drafted us, and we became part of her staff, in effect, to get the things done. So it was a long and frustrating process. It never seemed justified in our mind, just as with Shadrach and with Wilson. And by the way, thanks for the Parrott family that's also here. Appreciate all that. But that's just the way it works sometimes. It's like that old Greek myth of Sisyphus pushing that rock up the top of the mountain only to have it. In fact, it's almost like a Roadrunner cartoon. Have that thing just roll right back over top into the bottom of the hill. Yeah. So that's it. And I think even though it's over 160 years' time, I think back through time, Larry can reach back. When Larry Taylor was called, when Shadrach and Wilson were called by their country, they were there. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Morrowtown, Tennessee. This podcast is a production of News Channel 9, Fox Chattanooga, and Sinclair Broadcast Group Chattanooga. I hope you join me again real soon.